Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Call Time with my name, as always, is Bryan Davis. Joining me today is the independent wrestler known as, I believe, or one of his monikers. I think is the one above all. I'm not sure if you have any other monikers that you could probably chime in and say, "Oh yeah, I have those," but I'm like primarily known as this one. But his name is Anthony Gangone. Gangone. Oh, I know
No,
I'm.
you got it the first time.
Oh, Gangone. Okay.
Gangone, yeah,
Oh, Gangone. Okay.
yeah.
If I mess it up, sorry. So,
That's all right. I'm used to it.
all right. I've seen him work in Callous Wrestling, who I've done show reports in the past. I'm also seen him in the past, so I've probably seen him actually wrestle probably a couple of times in person. So he is like a legitimate treat to see in live action. So, Anthony, how did you get before I actually had you get into wrestling? Did you have any like any experience with acting and that sort of thing too, or was it just sort of like something that just came to something that came into your frame of mind once you started wrestling?
No, I didn't have any performance background. Um, any legitimate one, whether that's school plays or I mean I've done school plays, but nothing that I would say was a serious in on acting or anything like that. I always knew that I would be a wrestler as a kid.
Hmm.
Uh, that was the only goal. And honestly, I mean, whether it's being an independent wrestler or one day getting signed or anything like that, I fulfilled that dream when it came to that. But no, I didn't have any background when it came to acting or production or anything that has to do with maybe plays or TV or anything like that. Just school plays.
Oh, okay. Because from what I've seen or from what I've experienced over the past couple of years, especially as an actor, that a few of my friends or a few of my theater colleagues, I should say, have tried their hand in going into wrestling or in that like frame of thing. Oh, I could, I'll probably, uh, you know, um, train at a wrestling school and do a show, that sort of thing too. And then because they'd be big WWE fans or whatnot, or and then but like I would never hear anything else from like them saying, "Oh, yeah," it was like, "Oh, I just like had like a career change of like I didn't want to be a wrestler. I just became like an office worker or something like that," which isn't which is fine and all, but because I understand like wrestling is a taxing experience on your body too. So it's like if you're like 25 and you don't want to worry about being in a ring hurting your body, then but then again there are people who are legitimately loving the sport of wrestling and who will do whatever they want and not do whatever they want, do whatever it takes to win, including if that even means pushing their body to like their physical limit. So when it came to actually being a wrestler, like what was the the challenges you were having to find, because in New York City, or in the tri-state, I should say, there are like I want to say like maybe five places at least I know of that are in like both New Jersey and in New York. And I'm not saying New York City as a whole. I'm saying New York, like in the state of New York. So when you were trained, when you decided to become a pro wrestler, like how did you narrow it down to like, okay, I want to go to this place because it's right by me, or is it just like it's by experience, or was like what was like the the way you figured out, okay, this is where I want to go as a wrestler to be trained as a wrestler?
Yeah, when I first started, I checked out one school that was maybe an hour away from me, and I just couldn't at that time couldn't crunch the numbers. I was 18 at that time. About a year later, I found a school that was closer by me at that time, and it was owned and operated by someone that was on television that I knew of and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I went there, and the rest is really history from that. I stood there for a good amount of time until it was my time to leave. But that's kind of how it started with wrestling school. And like when it comes to wrestling, you kind of have to wait until you're a certain age to do it because it is very dangerous and all that. So I would say hopefully, if you're a legitimate school, you don't allow people to start training until they're in their later teens. So I would say 16, 17, 18, 19, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, just because, it does a lot of damage to your body. Even
Yeah.
if you do things perfectly, it still does a lot of damage to your body and could, even stunt your growth and stuff like that, I'm sure. I'm not a doctor, so I shouldn't
Oh,
say
of
that
course not.
for sure. But it's probably not the best idea to fall on your back constantly as you're growing.
Yeah. It definitely feels like if you do it, if you are wrestling or training when you're like in your like late teens, early adulthood, you gotta at least wait like a little while until you like finish growing it because by that point it's obviously like you know it's like the same thing when with that with acting. There's a lot of actors who go into acting, especially if they're coming out of college and whatnot, who would be very mindful of, oh, I want to do all these roles and all this stuff, and then they find out it's a very cutthroat business like this. I would think the same thing with wrestling too, whereas it's a cutthroat business, but at the same time, it's like it wears down on your body constantly because, especially, and of course, I'm just saying it as an actor because I'm trying to like compare it to other things, but I'm pretty sure, you know, you haven't like I'm pretty sure you did you like like a promoter didn't say, hey, Anthony, I need you to do a monologue in front of the crowd. Monologue in front of the crowd. You got like 5 minutes. Just rehearse this. so
Yeah. I
so
mean, yeah, no. Um, I mean, what would be equivalent to monologues is all improvising when it comes to wrestling. Now,
yeah,
from what I understand, once you get to a company like WWE, which is the biggest show in town, they
yeah,
actually do have writers and they do have scripts. Whether they read them or monologue it to a T, I'm not aware of that per se, but yeah, no, it's basically, live stunt work
yeah.
with improvisation. So it's basically like whose line is it anyway with stunts. So that's the best way to really describe it.
Now, uh, with wrestling being a very improvisational line of work, have you done something in the ring or figured out like a moment in time where it's like, oh, you know, the blocking between the two of us, we kind of know what we're doing, like maybe during the match or before the match, like say, just don't do this, don't do that. But has like when things change during the match, like when things happen to be like booked on the fly or run on the fly, I should say. Like, uh, what is the thought process of okay, I have to work in the moment. What is like the thought process of I have to work on with ugh. Sorry. What is the thought process of I have to work in the moment with something that didn't go according to plan?
Yeah, I would say that every match is like that. Now, there's things that happen that maybe you follow it to a T that you have written down or something in the back, but I would say every match you have to work on the fly. And there's things that can happen like myself. I've been injured during a match. Um,
Hmm.
so I've broken my ankle during a match.
Oh,
I've
damn.
torn my labrum at Catalyst during a match, and you kind of continue forward with that, and hopefully you do have a good partner in the ring to keep you as safe as possible. I don't recommend continuing a match being injured, especially
Yeah.
with how things are. Lately, especially when it comes to concussions and things of that nature. But in my particular case, I did continue, and hopefully, you have a good partner, and you kind of there's kind of like a universal language, even though everyone's changed or trained differently. There's kind of like a universal language when it comes to wrestlers. It's kind of like a secret, like way of speaking or whatever to allow you to continue the match and kind of throw everything that you might have had planned. And that's kind of like the best way to explain it. Anytime I speak about wrestling, it's kind of hard to truly encapsulate what it is unless you're
Yeah.
in it, because I could explain these things to someone that maybe is not so familiar with wrestling, but at the same time, unless you're in it and you truly have a love for it and a passion for it and kind of understand everything about it, there's really no true way to explain it because, yes, wrestling is not what normal life would say is real, but at the same time, it is real. So
Yeah.
it's such a strange art form to be a part of because it's just like when you're an actor you have a script to follow and you may make ask the director or whomever like, oh, I think I might say this sentence this way, what do you think about this? But in wrestling you kind of like you might have called something in the back where in the match you change it to, let's say, I don't know, a drop kick because something happened to your arm instead. You really don't get, I don't think, in a more basic sense of acting, you really don't get that in acting where you do in wrestling.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely does feel like wrestling is, like you said before, a almost like a version of Whose Lines It Anyway, where you know your opponent and you would probably figure out something like a term of blocking in terms of, okay, this is what we should do, and this is what we need to do. You may have during the match, your opponent might have tweaked their knee, so they had to work around that. So it's like, or if you're a villain, you know, just say, hey, I'm not gonna hurt you. It's just like you gotta like I gotta make sure to like sell the whole knee injury and stuff like that too, and not really hurt them. But of course, I'm not like condoning like you gotta go out and like hurt somebody.
I mean, there's things that happen in the ring that people legitimately do try to hurt you,
yeah,
or maybe take it more competitive in the beginning with something we call chain wrestling, which kind
yeah,
of has a basis in amateur wrestling. And there could be people like, yes, they're not going to go in there, let's say like a MMA fight and try to tap you out or put you to sleep for real, but they're going to kind of like test you as an athlete in
yeah.
a kind of a Greco-Roman sense that's not planned at all in the back. Or
Hmm.
someone can legitimately, let's say you punched them in the eye or something. It could have been a complete mistake as well. And then the other person gets upset and then gives you what is called like a receipt, which is actually try to hurt you with a punch or a kick to
Yeah.
kind of give back to you. So, like I said, it's really a unique plat way of acting because it is acting, even though
Yeah.
I don't think that stories and true acting is valued that much in wrestling at this time or maybe ever. But as far as the physical sense, um, it's still there. But when it comes to doing a promo, which would be equivalent to a monologue, um, or showing a different kind of emotion or evolution of a character, I wouldn't say really prevalent in wrestling like it would be on a television show or a play or whatever.
Now, you just mentioned character. Was your character, or I should say gimmick, or yeah, gimmick character, what have you, has it been consistent to when you first started out, or or were there like moments where you actually evolved from that point of that character? Because I know I've seen your work in Callous, and if I remember correctly, because it has been a year, but you and the owner then, Mr. Entertainment Harry Georgianian, you and him have like a big feud in that thing. But over the time with you and him, feuding, you like your character kind of like took a darker turn in terms of like dealing with the owner. So over the years, like when you have a evolution in your character, is it basically still the same character, or is it just like still like some tweaks into that character that's already been there, but it's sort of like you're kind of like opening up a new doorway of that character?
Yeah, no, I would say that I've had different characters. And the issue with wrestling is that you work so many different places that want something different from you that it's hard to really try to evolve yourself. Or there's so many places that just have a match for you. That's the only time that you have. And I don't know if that you can do so much of a character change with just a match. It's possible, but it's not a long-term kind of story. It's very much of those 10 to 20 minutes. When I first started wrestling, I was solely a character of just being better than everyone in the sense of physically in the ring, whether
Yeah,
it's whatever my move set was or the smoothness, excuse me, of my transition, stuff like that. Later on, kind of adopted a kind of like a V for Vendetta kind of gimmick,
hmm.
and from that, it grew. From that transition grew to, hey, I want wrestling to be in my own image. So then I would gather this group of people that would be a cult, like,
Yeah,
and they would put on my face, which was the V for Vendetta Guy Fawkes mask,
yeah,
which I customized. It had like a beard and stuff like that, my logo. So then it's like I'm making wrestling in my own image with these people, and then I called myself the one above all because I thought at that point I was like some kind of like god or above everybody to call myself that. So that was kind of the transition there. And when you just mentioned Harry, when I joined Catalyst, Harry was like the head of Catalyst, right?
yeah,
And I was very much an anti-establishment kind of guy, and I didn't trust Harry, and I thought Harry was corrupt, and absolute power always corrupts, absolutely, right? So
yeah.
that was kind of the gimmick there, but like dealing with Harry and dealing with him constantly bothering me or constantly involving himself in my matches or whatever I was doing, it kind of made my character more bitter to go to that more dark side and kind of
Yeah.
be more of a darker character than I was as just a strict anti-establishment character.
Now, how did you get into Callous Wrestling as a wrestler there? Because as I've only worked there, I mean, I still kind of work there because I still do like writing reports, but that's sort of like when I could, because one, I got to actually catch up on Callous Wrestling on YouTube, and as I said, the last time I really watched it was probably like a year ago when the Side Owl stuff was sort of like closing its like tournament. So, and this actually does bring a good point up, but I'll get to it get to it in a little while. But COVID, especially as an independent wrestler, and going to shows that have little to no crowd or no crowd at all, just limited to the wrestlers or the staff there. compared to now where it is sort of like it is slowly getting back up. But again, that's a different question altogether. But how did you get into Callous Wrestling?
So how I got into Catalyst was I knew at the time the one of the co-owners. We worked together in the past when it came to wrestling, other promotions, and I believe, don't quote me on this, it was maybe the third show Catalyst had, and he asked me to come in. I wrestled MJF at the first
Oh,
time I
wow.
was at Catalyst. Who MJF is a huge deal in wrestling right now, one of the most important wrestlers out there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it started. It was like one of those, I need you for this role. I know you can do it because of our work in the past. And that's how it kind of started.
Hmm. From how it's gone, and Matt Ryan, who is one of the producers there at Callous, he's talked about in the past of all the people who has worked in there, like former, like you just mentioned MGF. I know Sonny Kiss was there, and I believe Diana Rose and Jake Hager, even if it was just like a one night only thing. From and Kobe Carino, I'm not sure if he's still the champion. I'm not sure if that has changed, but I know for a while he was the champion there, and now he's doing amazing work in the NWA. From your standpoint, and you see all these people jumping, well, I wouldn't say jumping, but working from Callous Wrestling to say like the AEW or NWA or WWE, whereas it's like they have this position, especially as an independent wrestler, where it's just like they have made it to the big time compared to say, just a few years ago, you and them were probably in the back somewhere eating or and just like shooting the shit, whereas it's like, hey, you know, you think Batman could really take out Superman or something like that, sort of like that sort of thing, where it's just like because I've had moments in the past where it's like I've worked with people, especially as an actor, to see my friends go on to bigger things and go, wow, I was actually acting with them like maybe 3 years ago, and now they're booking a TV deal. And I'm like, like it just blows my mind of how essentially, like the people that you work with, especially as a wrestler, they may become a very big factor, maybe in a span of say 2 years, maybe even 1 year, depending on if how well the trajectory is promotion wise.
Yeah, I mean, I myself have done AEW extra work, so I to kind of see to go to AEW and see such a high level of what what would essentially be like a production TV production team and stuff like that compared to the independent level, and then to go to a locker room where I would see that I was on the same show as, now obviously having big money contracts, being on television every week, and like we've wrestled in front of like no people, and now
Yeah,
they're wrestling in front of 10,000 people, I think it was that night. So like I've gotten a taste of that as well, but it is very surreal. And I mean, I'm sure it's just like acting, where it's
yeah,
like one day you're acting in front of no people, and then the next day, whether it's your agent or whomever kind of books you on some sitcom or whatever the case is, and then your life kind of changes completely. It was like one day you're living kind of, the same as the Jeffersons song, right?
yeah,
So you're moving on up.
yeah. It's a especially if you're in New York City, where it's just like a lot of people who live in New York City as an actor, they kind of like want to make it there as an actor compared to people who go to LA who want to be an actor because of Hollywood and stuff like that too, and they kind of like see the nature of the beast because of casting and stuff like that. But that's different. That's a different conversation, not
Yeah.
involved in wrestling. But but speaking of California, have you actually worked in California in
Yeah,
terms
I
of
worked
wrestling?
in San Diego before.
Oh, because I rarely, I mean, because I know the California wrestling scene is essentially I'm not sure if they're still one of the strongest points in terms of independent wrestling. Nowadays it's sort of like, oh, if you think of independent wrestling, it's like you think of probably places that are usually like maybe like Jersey, Philadelphia, Washington D.C., New York, uh, Maryland. Maybe even Rhode Island sometimes. I'm not sure if there actually there is probably a preparation of Rhode Island, but but from a wrestling standpoint, I mean a wrestler standpoint, what was like the vibe going? I mean, yeah, what was like the vibe going into a California or West Coast wrestling thing compared to say an East Coast federation? Or is it just basically the same thing, but just like booked differently? It's a different style. It's more.
Uh, I think honestly, I would say that I don't think I really changed it up too much when I went to San Diego, just because I would say that the wrestling fans in San Diego were kind of like the same in like a city kind of sense. You know how like a lot of to kind of in a political way,
Yeah,
kind of you go to like certain cities and they're like kind of the same in their mentality of how they kind of view politics, right? It's
yeah,
more liberal than it would be in like in like a landlocked kind of state, I guess.
yeah.
So like I wouldn't say necessarily like in California, but there's like if I go to Jersey, I may have to wrestle a different style because it's not the city, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, you know?
Yeah,
So I would say there is differences depending on where you are, right? So if you wrestle in like the South,
yeah,
you would have to wrestle, you may have to wrestle more of like a story character based, where if you wrestle in New York City, they kind of only care more about, I shouldn't say only care, they care much more about work rate,
mm,
match quality, kind of how hard you hit,
yeah.
the realism of it, I guess. So yeah, but it all depends. It literally could change from city to city, province to province, state to state, all that.
Hmm. Because I've yeah, one of my friend, or well, one of my brother's friends, he is a former wrestler, and he hasn't worked in wrestling since I believe the late '90s, early 2000s. So he has he's been gone for like a long while. So he's kind of like very used to like independent wrestling, sort of like the days of close to a sense of the days of old, where it was like West Coast being like more. And he does live in the West Coast. He lives in California, so he's kind of like very used to like the California way of like West Coast wrestling and stuff like that too. Even though he has worked in the East Coast before, but yeah, I did want to like ask, like, especially going like as a wrestler, is like especially knowing like what type of promotions there was, especially in the West Coast compared to I wouldn't say like the prestige promotions, but like promotions that were very famous because they were like the jumping off point for various wrestlers because they were on the West Coast. Like if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's I think I would say that the strongest aspect of indie wrestling is on the Northeast. I don't I'm not to say that California doesn't, but it has when it comes to like what exactly California wrestling scene, independent scene is, it's kind of like more like syndication kind of wrestling,
Ah,
where
got
they do wrestling and they kind of syndicate it to local stations.
yeah,
There is more independent like I don't want to say New York style. Let's just say Northeast style wrestling there.
yeah,
But I would say that when you go to California, you're more inclined to work uh syndication style television wrestling
yeah,
than you were in the Northeast, right? Northeast, there is. TV style wrestling, but it's more whatever you want to call the internet is now, when it comes to like syndication, right? So
Yeah,
you might do a couple shows which will go on like an all wrestling site, which your show might premiere every Thursday or every other month or whatever the case is, which is a lot different from doing a weekly show on syndication on like a Channel 9 or a ABC affiliate or whatever the case is, right?
yeah. Now, going back to my previous question I just mentioned, which was COVID. When wrestling shut down, well, yeah, when everything was shutting down March of 2020, I was about to say 2022. Knock on wood there. I don't want everything to shut down again. Please, God, please don't have that. Anyway, when 2 years ago, when everything shut down, wrestling was at a standstill. A lot of uh, Matt Ryan again from Callous, he said that they were basically they had a lot of matches set up to a point of like say mid April show, and then they would have to essentially go back to the archives and basically create more stories from previous stories, stuff like that too. But from an independent wrestling standpoint, what what about the business change from March of 2020 compared to now, especially both as a wrestler and as a business wrestler or agent, or like when you had to take a booking? There we go. But I don't know what the actual I don't know what the biz like you had the professional wrestling. Well, you had the wrestling side and then you had the business side. There we go.
Yeah. So as a wrestler, um, so you would go into these shows, there would be more tapings, there would be no fans there. And depending on the show, you may have to perform in front of the actual wrestlers, which
Yeah,
is all also unique because at least the way I see it, you kind of go out there and now you have to be even more impressive because now you kind of have to impress the people that are in wrestling
yeah,
for them to react, which is different because when you perform in front of an audience, you're more of an illusionist, a magician. So you may want them to believe your tricks, right? But
yeah,
now you're performing in front of people that know your tricks. So it's kind of like that Penn and Teller show
yeah,
where you have to perform and they have to guess how you did the performance. So that's one aspect. But then you would wrestle in front of nobody, right? Which is
yeah,
also unique because now it feels more real. It's literally you, uh, another opponent, and a referee, maybe a camera, whatever. And it's like it feels more like a actual legitimate fight now,
yeah,
because you're not performing. You have no one else to look to get a reaction. You literally have to kind of perform with that person, As far as like the business side of it, it hurt a lot because so many places disappeared completely, or it took a while for them to come back, or there would be dry spells of actual shows because you wouldn't be able to send out your resume or reach out to somebody because that show doesn't exist anymore or doesn't
yeah,
exist at that time. And then depending on which um state you were in, what allowed what, and if you
yeah,
had to go get a COVID test, if that was even possible in the time frame needed, or if you got COVID, how long it took to actually recover. Because COVID attacks you, or had attacked at least me physically, where it took me a good amount of time to get my wind back,
oh
which
wow,
is yeah. So it really was a unique situation when it came to that, and it was a lot like acting,
yeah,
or actors, what they had to deal with as well. But I don't think it was as severe because I mean Broadway came back like
oh
not too
yeah,
long ago at this point. So I wouldn't say it was as severe because there was shows still going on during COVID, but it was a lot harder to find consistent work, like I had previously.
Now, one may like going back to that question, especially on the wrestling side. Uh, Wrestling is a closed contact sport, and you don't want to be, I mean, there was a time where the WWE and AEW and probably a few other places were doing more cinematic matches where it'd be like more uh, singular location, spread out, filmed in advance, that sort of thing too. When it came to the art of wrestling, like what was changing because what was changing just regardless, whereas like I don't want to do a move too close to you, you know, yeah, I don't want to do a move too close to you, so I don't want to like get the risk of because the same thing it's like the same thing in theater where it's like in theater we're all very close together, especially if you're behind the scenes. On stage it might be spread out, but behind the scenes, if you're waiting behind the queue, you might be essentially like maybe 2 feet across from somebody, and with it being socially distant and stuff like that too. From a wrestling standpoint, like what was changing compared to like say previously, where it's like, oh yeah, I could do it like uh, a bear hug on you, and that won't be too much of a problem. Now I probably would have to figure out what is more comfortable now from a wrestler standpoint in order to perform a match, because like you said before, it is an art form. At the same time, I mean, it's an art form that has like a great illusionist feel to it, whereas just like, you know, will changing a move set factor into essentially, hey, I got to figure out a new move set because pre-COVID this was okay, but post-COVID this might not be okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily that, there's really no way. It's not like you can have a wrestling match and be socially distant. It's
Yeah,
impossible,
obviously.
right? But I would say the only real difference when it came to in-ring, I would say that you would probably not perform a more high risk move
Yeah,
because there was no one there to get the reaction from. So, like, if they're wrestling is always risky, no matter if you know how to hit a move, regardless, it is always risky. But there's moves that are more risky than others. So I would say the more high risk moves, maybe something to the outside, onto the concrete or mats or whatever. I would say most people probably avoided when there was no crowds. I would also say probably like spit, stuff like that was
yeah,
avoided as well. I would say COVID affected more the backstage area
yeah.
where it was more, people had masks or they had to prove that they were vaccinated or whatever the case is, or tested. People were more socially distant there, or you would have a conversation outside compared to being in the locker room. So yeah.
Now, Callous Wrestling did well through a series of interesting. I'm trying to remember how it happened, but through a series of interesting things, they inherited an island of that was supposedly a Ontario. I'm not sure if it was supposedly it was the island that but essentially Side Out Island, working on a quote unquote deathmatch island for a long period of time, especially from a wrestling standpoint, where it's like, okay, I'm going to be in this location for X amount of months. It is for a tournament. It is for a good cause. It's a tournament for money. I need money because of what's been happening with COVID and everything too. Uh, compared to say AEW, where it's like, oh, they practically had a residency. I mean, with both AEW and WWE, where they basically had a residency with one single location, the Daily's Place, and the Thunderdome for as like a period of close to a year or over a year.
Hmm.
When it became apparent that yes, I have to wrestle for X amount of days at this one single location because of TV tapings or what have you. like from a physical standpoint is like, was it like almost like, was the wear and tear like, yeah, was there like wear and tear whereas like you just didn't want to like over exhaust your body or exert your body? There we go.
Yeah, I don't know how to really answer that because I was eliminated quite quickly from that. So
Ah, right.
I wouldn't have
I'm sorry.
no, that's no problem. I
Again,
really
this has been like
wouldn't
a year since I caught up with everything, so I'm just like,
no issue at all. So I myself don't have a personal experience on how that would be.
oh, okay. But yeah, it does bring up a good point of wear and I wouldn't say wear and tear, but just like endurance tests, especially if you have to be in a single location for say an X amount of time, especially as a wrestler, especially if you have to do TV tapings for like say uh, a 5 weeks worth of TV tapings in a span of like say a week or so. From yeah, uh, from that question though, has the business essentially changed from a television TV standpoint, where it's like now, okay, yeah, because you brought up AEW before, you know, you wrestled AEW Dark, or rather, you wrestled on AEW Dark. There we go.
Hmm.
Uh, because it does bring up a good point or a good question I had, which was essentially compared to say, I know it's a long-winded, I mean a long-winded question. I'm sorry, but from a day of performance, like say I'm going to be wrestling in say Boston in 2 weeks, compared to say okay, but in the meantime I do have a booking down in say NWA for a pay-per-view before that, you know, compared to say, you know, be before, yeah, between a live show that's like a pay-per-view compared to say a single show that's like a just a regular single show, like what is the, yeah, what is the like the process for that day, especially, you know, especially when it's show like, especially when my show called Call Time, what is exactly is the call time between like those two shows, whereas like one show is just an independent show with like say 300 people compared to say a pay-per-view with like say 5,000 people.
Yeah, so when it comes to like the TV companies, you have to show up around I would say 6 to 7 hours before the show.
Mm,
When it comes to an independent company, I think it's fair to say maybe 3 to 2 hours before the show starts.
yeah.
And I think the issue when you're an independent wrestler, as far as call times, is that you have more than likely have a life outside of wrestling to help provide uh, for you and in your life, you know, groceries, rent, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like if a show's on a Friday, you know, you don't get out of work until 3, and then you have to be the show starts at 7. So
Yeah.
that definitely takes, you know, plus you have a whole day of work that you already did. You know, how many people, I mean, I know there's a lot of people that have multiple jobs as well, but how many people, you know, you start a 9 to 5, and then the next thing you know, you also have to go to a show after that and physically perform, and you're already tired. And who's to say that you didn't wake up early to also work out or run or whatever? So that's another negative when it comes to like indie wrestling, wherein if you're in AEW, more than likely that is your only job. I mean, you could be like other wrestlers who also want to delve in acting or other kind of brands or I have this health plan or whatever the case is. But more than likely, your TV contract is enough to provide for you and your
Hmm.
family. So also in indie wrestling, Well, it's the same kind of for TV as well, depending on which company you're a part of. But, you try to get your schedule full. So you could be in Boston on Friday, and then you gotta go to Pennsylvania the next day. Then you gotta go to like Virginia the day after that, and then you gotta go back home. So
Yeah.
you're in the car for tons of hours at that point, which there is no recovery for your body. Where
No.
when you're a bodybuilder or I don't know, health nut, let's just say, um, you have your recovery days. With wrestling, you may have to wrestle on your recovery days or whatever the case is. So it's a lot more taxing on the body and like you also have to perform at this level now where, you can't show your fatigue or you can't show you have to be in a condition that people can't tell like you wrestled the past 2 nights for an hour because they have no idea what you did the 2 nights previously when it comes to indie wrestling. When it comes to like the AEW like kind of schedule, like you have to work your TV tapings or if you have to do dark. From what I understand, usually it might be at most a 3-day kind of process.
Hmm.
And they don't do house shows that I'm aware of. So I
You do
think
have
that
to like.
I do
Yeah.
think that aspect of COVID kind of helped the wrestlers, where you had to do your TV tapings. You had 2 days off, let's say for WWE. Then you had to do house shows for the next 3 days. Then you had to do TV or pay per view or whatever, and you only had 2 days, and basically one day is just traveling. So you had one day off, and
Yeah.
your body's so broken and defeated, and you just got to keep doing it week after week.
Yeah, because I honestly wondered about that because especially, I mean, all companies are different, especially if it's a wrestling company. WWE has their own like set schedule of like if you're on TV that day, like you're working on Raw. There's a couple of dark matches before Raw and after Raw, and then the following day, you got people who are in NXT, blah blah blah, and then compared to say an independent show, say, pro wrestling, uh, like Pro Wrestling America or something like that. They're doing a show on Friday, and like you just said before, you have to set your schedule and all that stuff, especially if you are working. You know, I've had friends, especially who are actors, who have to literally like the same thing, where it's like they are literally working the day of. They're working their job the day of before they have to go out and just go right back into. They have to run to the theater to that date, so they don't have to miss that show because it's like the same thing where it's just like if it's like a full fledged performance instead of like a one night thing, or if it's like a one night thing, or if it's like a comedy show that like I've been part of, it might be like a 2 hour call time, right? But if it's like a play, right, a performance, it's like the same thing where a TV taping where I have to arrive 6 hours before schedule because we still have to do, check-ins, we still have to do uh, any last minute changes to the script. The director might have a new blocking for one of us. A light cue has to be fixed. Because it's the day of, and it's always been. And then and again, theater is a very fun place because it's always evolving, and I think the same thing could be with wrestling because it's always evolving too, especially in that moment. Uh, yeah, I think that's sort of yeah, that's sort of like I have it in terms of questions. Oh, so I do have one last question though, and it is regarding to like characters in wrestling. I noticed that more recently, characters in wrestling have either been hits with, and this is probably something that you probably could talk about, is that when there are like characters or gimmicks in the crowd that are, I wouldn't say are being pushed on people like like their characters being pushed on people, whereas like you have to cheer for this, or by the time they, like they start cheering for them, they might just start booing them. When there are characters in wrestling, or rather when there are wrestlers who are trying to work a crowd, and the crowd does not, seem to agree with them, they might just back away and they start, like changing their character on, I wouldn't say the day of, but maybe after after a match, they say, I don't think I can work as a face anymore. I don't feel like I'm comfortable as a face. I just might just start working as a bad guy. When it comes to characters in wrestling, like what is I wouldn't say the secret ingredient, but what is the fact, like the X factor that allows these characters to essentially survive? Because Stone Cold Steve Austin is a fabulous character. Bret the Hitman Hart is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Macho Man Randy Savage. I could, let's go on and on, like other great characters over the past, like, say, 30 years. But when I think of characters now, I think of like Sami Zayn has a great character going with him, because he has a whole conspiracy theorist type of character. I love the fact that Seth Rollins has like relished in the fact that he's become like, he has like that god complex thing, where he's more mindful about everything everything is him. Like everything has to be about him. That sort of factor. Like the Fiend, not my Fiend. My Fiend poster is because I love the character of the Fiend, because I love how the quality was played on the thing. But nowadays, I see like whenever there's a good wrestler with a good gimmick or good character, sometimes the crowd is like kind of behind it, but booking wise, it's not really impactful.
Yeah, so I've had situations where I've literally had to change my game plan as far as what my character is during a match.
Hmm.
So I went in there thinking, okay, I would be the bad guy. And then when I went out there, they weren't cheering for the other guy, they were cheering for me. So we kind of switched the roles literally right there. When Nowadays, when it comes to wrestling, I think that you have to be aware of things and not force things onto people.
Yeah.
People kind of they want some sort of like realness to it in a lot of ways. Like they want to, if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. So like I guess the best example to use right now, like Roman Reigns,
Yeah.
for a long time was supposedly supposed to be a good guy.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, it did work, right? But eventually, when they did do that transition into being a more of a villain, that was, I would say that's more to what Roman is now, and kind of was exactly what the people wanted. And
Yeah.
I think the most successful thing for anything is to do what the people want, that especially if they pay for your product. It's like,
Yeah.
why would you change things up if they want, when if it's not broken, don't fix it, kind of thing. And like, let's say, as far as longevity, let's take Bret Hart.
Yeah.
When it comes to Bret Hart, on a TV aspect, he started as a tag wrestler, not, let's just say, not much of a character in that sense. He had a cool look. His
Yeah.
partner, they kind of had like, his partner was like the big kind of brute kind of character, and he was more of the technician. Then you see him kind of climbing up the ladder. Then he becomes like, not to steal from The Rock, kind of like the people's champion. Like the people just related to him because
Yeah.
they saw him struggle. And then to the point where maybe that was getting too tiring, there he is, like, oh, I'm Canadian. I'm kind of better than you
Yeah.
Americans, kind of thing, which plays perfectly into Austin, who at that time, once you're in the mid '90s, you kind of had this like uh, um, culture where it was kind of like, fuck the rules kind of thing. I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to curse.
No, you could curse.
So it was kind of that, and that character fit, and then it's like Bret Hart, who's like a very traditional, wrestler and hero, kind of like the Boy Scout. And then you have Steve Austin, who's a very non-traditional hero that was perfect for the mid '90s.
Yeah,
So
because the way I see it now is like I just see a lot of wrestlers, especially now. I wouldn't say the older wrestlers, but the newer wrestlers, they are like finding their spotlight, but it is taking time for them to find that spotlight because of, say, booking issues or just like you said before, like like they put their like they become a part of a tag team, and the tag team just happens to be more like I wouldn't say stable, but more like fan friendly, or they really hate them as a tag team, so they're working well as a tag team, that sort of thing too. Where it's just like I think it's also another thing where it's like now with the advantage of social media, wrestlers are now getting a lot more uh, attention to not only their character work, but also their like say in ring ability too. Whereas just like nowadays, like I'm pretty sure Twitter or Instagram was probably or Facebook even, where like 30 years ago, where it was well, yeah, like 25 years ago, where it was like at the start of the Attitude Era, like it would be a different like a different feeling back then, especially with people posting online saying, Stone Cold Steve Austin just won, well, not Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mankind just won the belt from The Rock, and it was during a taping, and no one knew about that, and then sure enough, there's that famous clip of Cervani, I think, saying, "Oh, by the way, you know, don't go watch the promotion that's on the other channel because their uh, champion is being dethroned by like some sort of other champion tonight," and then that kind of like changes the perspective of, oh, Mankind actually won the champion, and then suddenly everybody just starts watching that thing compared to now, where it's just like nowadays because of social media, nothing really is sacred anymore, and I mean, it is sacred, but it just depends on the the character. There we go. And just to wrap it back to the character work.
yeah, I mean, I would say with the internet and with social media, like to be a character is so much more difficult. Like MJF is the perfect evolution of that,
Yeah.
he sticks to his character even on social media. But nowadays, at least the internet aspect, which is a portion of the audience, they kind of like want to know like the real you, which
Yeah.
back then you thought man, Mick Foley was a great person. You didn't necessarily know that. Nowadays, it's like they'll post social media, whether it's political views or social views or their family pictures or whatever,
Yeah.
and it's like I didn't know what Stone Cold's family looked like when I was watching television in the '90s. Nor
Yeah.
did I care. And nowadays, it's like that kind of aspect of kind of being in character 24/7 is just a lot for a lot of people to kind of to do. Like you have to be a special kind of talent to
Yeah.
be able to do that for social media, for television, which I think for me, I think it's best to just kind of leave people in mystery.
Hmm. And speaking of social media, and I'm kind of like, as to wrap up my show, where can we find you on social media?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Twitter, it's at Anthony Gangone. On Instagram, it's at Anthony Gangone underscore, and then you just search my name on Facebook. Um, I don't I try to be as entertaining as I can be, or worth a follow as I can be, but I really hate social media. It's
Yeah.
really against me as a human being, what I would do if I wasn't, in wrestling or performing. But if you do want to follow me, that's where you can find me.
Yeah, it's odd because I'm at I'm literally at a phase in my life where social media is so dependent on not only views but also just like networking too. So it's like I would like oh, and I think this would be a great question to leave everything off is that in terms of social media and with people wanting to network, like do you see that being much more of long lasting a long lasting uh, substitute, or do you just prefer say, hey, I know a wrestler, I could get in contact with them, and I could just call them up or text them or whatnot, or I could just email them compared to say like some kid wanting to just DM you is like, hey, can you give me a match? Like I'm a wrestler, that sort of thing too.
Yeah, so I would say that it's definitely easier nowadays to try to network with people with social media, whether that's kind of more performative than, and there's kind of a performative aspect even in person that sometimes you see from people. But yeah, I would say it's definitely easier to be seen and all that compared to what it used to be with wrestling, with social media. But I still feel that making a actual connection to someone face to face is still the best way to network compared to just kind of being a faceless person on the internet. Now that in wrestling, at least, that's all I can really speak to. That still works. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but I'm saying like maybe to get to the next level where you want to be to actually physically know someone or have a relationship with someone um, on top of being a hard worker and producing good content um, is probably still the best option when it comes to networking.
Hmm. All right, that's a great answer. Again, Mr. Gangone, thank you for your time for taking essentially an hour out of your busy schedule. I know we kind of like ran up a little long, but I had a lot of questions in terms of. Uh, I feel like the business side of wrestling has always been an interesting side to hear about, and you have a lot of experience to talk about, especially as a wrestler. And you know, going forward, I can't wait to see where you pop up next, even if it's uh like a 2 day like a 2 day before I was gonna say 2 day performance, a 2 day wrestling event in the same city, and like, oh, like, oh, you're doing Brooklyn, okay, or you're doing something in Queens the following night. I'm like, oh wow, he's like, but I'm pretty sure that's like a anyway. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I'm sorry. I was rambling on there a little bit. But yeah, thank you for taking an hour of your busy schedule to talk to me about wrestling, but also just like the business side and also stuff like that too. As always, everyone, please be safe, be healthy, be well, and take care, everybody.